Today on The World Today, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak meets with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog and his counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu. Queues of lorries carrying food, water and medicine wait at the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt, hoping for news on border reopening. And Iran calls on Islamic countries to sanction Israel and expel all Israeli ambassadors. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers. Israeli troops are stationed near Gaza's border after Egypt agreed to reopen its crossing with the Hamas-run strip to allow in aid for Palestinians. The region remains volatile in the aftermath of an explosion at Gaza's Al-Ali Al-Arabi hospital late on Tuesday, which Palestinian officials say killed over 400 people, an action they blame on Israel. But Israel and the US say the cause was a failed rocket launch by militants in Gaza who denied responsibility. Israel's foreign ministry spokesperson, Leo Hyatt, said that the death toll from the blast was not up to 400 as being claimed. In the meantime, Israel has released footage of strikes on targets it said belonged to different groups, including Lebanon's Hezbollah and Palestinian group Hamas. In a post on Telegram, the Israeli Defense Forces said these strikes on targets are said to belong to Hezbollah operatives, which included an observation point facing the sea, where in response to shooting attacks that took place on Wednesday, Hezbollah, an ally of Hamas, and Palestinian militant group Islamic Jihad, which both have operatives in Lebanon, said it carried out attacks, including a guided missile strike against an Israeli army vehicle in the Israeli border town of Metula. In a separate Telegram post, the IDF said it had continued to strike buildings said to belong to Hamas, with targets including anti-tank missile launching posts, tunnel shafts, intelligence infrastructure, and command centers. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has promised Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu that his country would stand by Israel in its darkest hour following the October 7 rampage by Hamas gunmen. Mr. Sunak arrived in Israel on Thursday to hold talks with the Israeli Prime Minister as Israel's counteroffensive against Hamas spiraled in Gaza. He also welcomed the decision to allow aid into Gaza and thanked the Israeli government for supporting the families of British hostages.
You describe this as Israel's darkest hour. Well, then it's for me to say I'm proud to stand here with you in Israel's darkest hour. As your friend, we will stand with you in solidarity, we will stand with your people, and we also want you to win. Can I also say that we have seen the scenes over the past day that have shocked all of us, particularly at the hospital, and we mourn the loss of every innocent life, civilians of every faith, every nationality who have been killed. We also recognise that the Palestinian people are victims of Hamas too. And that is why I welcome your decision yesterday that you took to ensure that routes into Gaza will be opened for humanitarian aid to enter. But I also want to thank you for the support that your government has given to the families of British nationals caught up in this horror, including your efforts to release the hostages, secure their release.
Thank you.
Before meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak also spoke with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog, saying the UK stood in solidarity with Israel as the two met. Mr. Sunak adds that it's also important to provide humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza, stressing the need to provide aid to them. The UK leader landed in Tel Aviv hours after US President Joe Biden left, carrying similar messages of support and condolence for Israelis.
We are extremely grateful for your visit to Israel, because you've come to visit Israel in our darkest hour, but we will overcome and prevail, and it will be our finest hour.
And first and foremost, I wanted to express my solidarity with you and your country after you have suffered something unspeakable, a barbaric act of terrorism, and to your last point, we should call it what it is. An act of terrorism perpetrated by an evil terrorist organization, Hamas. That's what I believe, and that's what we will continue to say. And in that vein, we will stand with Israel. We will stand with you in solidarity with your people and your right to defend yourself, to bring security back to your country, to your people, to ensure the safe return of the hostages that have been taken. And I know we will talk further about that later on, because that's the right thing to do. You have not just a right to do that, I think you have a duty to do that, to restore that security to your country. But I'm also grateful to you for the support that the Israeli government has provided to the families of British nationals who have been caught up in this tragedy. I very much appreciate that, and I know we will continue to cooperate closely and support your efforts to ensure the safe return of all the hostages that Hamas have so cruelly taken. And I'm glad that you and I have had a chance to discuss the need for humanitarian access. Palestinians are victims of what Hamas has done, and it's important that we continue to provide humanitarian access. I welcome the announcement yesterday. We in the UK have announced further aid that we're prepared to bring into the region, and we're keen to see that that gets to those who need it, to enable, as you say, when people have been asked to leave, to protect civilian life, which is the right thing to do. Where we can support them, we want to do that. And I very much welcome the progress that we've made on that, and I know we will continue to make it.
In the meantime, British Foreign Minister James Cleverly has met with his Egyptian counterpart Sameh Shoukry to discuss the situation in Gaza. Mr. Cleverly visited Israel last week and is due to travel to Turkey and Qatar over the coming days to discuss the conflict and seek a peaceful resolution. Britain said the three countries are vital to international efforts to uphold regional stability, free hostages, and allow humanitarian access into the Gaza Strip. Well, U.S. President Joe Biden has returned home following his 8-hour visit to Israel. Amid the heightening crisis in the Middle East, Mr. Biden pledged to help Israel and the Palestinians during the lightning visit on Wednesday, but a deadly hospital blast that he ascribed to an errant rocket fired by Gaza militants derailed talks with some Arab leaders to prevent the war spreading. He also promised more aid to Israel, which is bombarding Gaza, to try to root out militants from its ruling Hamas group. Mr. Biden says Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has agreed to open the Rafah border crossing to allow the trucks carrying humanitarian aid into Gaza.
I wanted to make sure there was a vehicle, a mechanism that this could happen quickly. And so I've been on the phone for the last, I don't know, we've been on the ground a while. That's why we haven't taken off with El-Sisi. I don't think I was on that long. It was about probably half an hour. And both my team here was with me. And he agreed that what he would do is open the gate to do two things. One, let up to 20 trucks through to begin with. Satterfield, my ambassador, is down there in Cairo now. He's going to coordinate this. He has my authority to do what is needed to get it done. They're going to patch the roads. They have to fill in potholes to get these trucks through. And that's going to occur. They expect it will take about 8 hours tomorrow. So there may be nothing rolling through until, what's today? What's the track of days? Thursday? On Wednesday? Probably until Friday.
And there's the Rafah
for this purpose. Not to allow a lot of people out, but to open it up for this purpose.
For humanitarian assistance.
For the trucks to be able to get through.
And is that just
up to 20 trucks? This has been a very blunt negotiation I've had. And so we want to get as many of the trucks out as possible. There's, I guess, 150 or something there. Not all of them will go. The first tranche, if there's a second tranche, see how it goes. The commitment is, if in fact they cross the border, the UN is going to be on the other side. But the point being that if Hamas confiscates it or doesn't let it get through, it just confiscates it, then it's going to end, because we're not going to be sending any humanitarian aid to Hamas if they're going to come be confiscated. That's the commitment that I've made. And so the bottom line is that El-Sisi deserves some real credit, because he was very accommodating, and quite frankly, as everyone I've spoken to thus far since this trip began.
Well, it's expected that 20 trucks carrying aid via the Rafah crossing should cross into Gaza in the next few days, with more to follow. The trucks are carrying food, water and medical supplies and have been waiting since Tuesday to be able to enter Gaza. Israel cut electricity, most water and stopped deliveries of food and medicine to Gaza following an attack by Hamas militants on October 7. Since then, Gaza's 2.2 million residents have been rapidly running out of basic supplies. The agreement to deliver a limited amount of aid via Egypt's Rafah crossing was reached by U.S. President Joe Biden and Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on Wednesday. Mr. Biden called Mr. al-Sisi following a brief visit to Israel. Well, some of those supplies are coming from the Venezuelan government, which has also sent dozens of boxes with 30 tons of aid for Gaza. They arrived in Egypt on Wednesday and are waiting to be allowed in. Footage from Al Arish Airport shows Red Crescent volunteers loading the boxes onto vehicles. The aid contains non-perishable food, water, first aid kits, medical supplies, and power plants. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro pressed for the establishment of a humanitarian aid corridor to help the local population during a phone conversation with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas on Sunday. Well, joining us to give more perspective on the situation is Olatunji Larry Barowa, human rights activist, and he joins us from Abuja. Thank you for joining us today.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Right. So what do you make of the stalled humanitarian aid at the Rafah border crossing currently? A desperate aid needed is on standby, but Gazans unfortunately cannot have any of that yet.
Yeah, it's to put it in the mildest way. It's actually very tragic to stall over the last couple of days for people who are in dire need of them. The humanitarian condition in the Gaza Strip, in the entire Gaza region, is a devastating one, especially when you have hospitals running out of food, running out of essential needs for people who are under emergency care. So every basic necessity and need are in short supply or are in zero supply right now. It is unfortunate and it is tragic. It is something that is unacceptable in this age and time. And we've had to deal with this. We've had to endure this kind of crisis, with the Syrian conflict, in which the people were bombarded severally. We've had to endure this. We even with the Yemeni conflict, in which the entire region and people of Yemen were starved and almost, but there have been this crisis, and this particular one, this is getting to the peak of it. It is right before our face. It is happening right in our, in our time, and it is unfortunate. It is tragic, and I'm expecting that we'll have more traction and faster resolution of the gridlock.
Right. So this deal to allow in aid into Egypt, and then through to Gaza was struck by the U.S. President Joe Biden and, the Egyptian President al-Sisi, with the support coming from the U.S. to Israel, saying that, the first attack was struck by Hamas militants. Do you see Israel allowing this aid to come in?
I think we need to pay attention to the rhetorics from the IDF and the government, from the Prime Minister. And it has been that they want every hostage that has been taken by the Hamas militant group be released conditionally before they can grant access to humanitarian aid and, supplies to start coming in there. And it's apparent that Israel is going to cut the bluff of the entire all countries who are sympathetic to of the people.
The network problems, I think, we're having with our human rights activist Olatunji Lariboa, who has been speaking to us via Zoom in Abuja. We do hope to continue that conversation so that network comes back in. But let's just continue on with this. Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi has described the explosion which struck a hospital in Gaza on Tuesday as an Israeli attack that marks the beginning of the end of what he calls the Zionist regime. Addressing a large crowd of protesters supporting Palestinians in Tehran, President Raisi also accused US President Joe Biden and the United States of being, quote, to partner in the crimes of Israel. The explosion at the Al-Ali hospital in Gaza on Tuesday killed 471 people and left 314 injured, and that's according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Israelis and Palestinians have blamed each other for the hospital bombing, and no one has claimed responsibility yet. Meanwhile, the Palestinian and Israeli envoys to the United Nations has slammed the United Nations Security Council for being unable to pass a resolution for a humanitarian pause in which the conflict between Palestinian and Israeli forces to allow aid to reach civilians in Gaza. The vote on the Brazilian drafted text was twice delayed in the last couple of days as the United States tries to broker aid access to Gaza. 12 members voted in favor of the draft text on Wednesday, while Russia and Britain abstained. The draft resolution also urged Israel, without naming it, to rescind its order for civilians and UN staff in Gaza to move to the south of the Palestinian enclave and condemned the terrorist attacks by Hamas.
For over 10 days now, you have witnessed it killing entire families, bomb shelters, schools, hospitals, residential buildings, convoys. You have heard it telling people to head south of Gaza and then bomb the south. It is beyond belief that some still speak of a right to self-defense of an occupying power that has made clear it is seeking blind vengeance, forced transfer, and annihilation of our people. A political disaster is underway, and yet the Security Council of the United Nations is unable to say the only thing that truly matters. Stop the bloodshed. I repeat, stop the bloodshed. For those who think they can avert a humanitarian catastrophe and a regional spillover while Israel continues bombing and killing Palestinians, think again. The region is united in telling you it is not possible. Listen to them. The only way to prevent both is to stop this criminal aggression against our people. Killing more Palestinians will never make Israel more secure. 75 years of experience should have been proof enough for those who want to learn.
So far, this council has not even condemned Hamas for the atrocity it perpetrated, let alone held Hamas fully responsible for the situation in Gaza. But here we are, discussing humanitarian corridors. Does nobody else see how ludicrous this is? Calling for calm, restraint, and ceasefires is like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Such steps will not eradicate the cancer that is Hamas. Humanitarian corridors will not prevent the next atrocity. The only thing that will is the utter obliteration of this satanic entity. What are you doing to prevent this evil? We demand an apology. An apology. The UN and some on this council rush to adopt the lies of ISIS-like terrorists and refuse to accept the hard evidence of a law-abiding democracy. You should apologize. Apologize for never convening the council when Hamas rockets are fired deliberately at Israeli hospitals. Barzilai Hospital in Ashkelon was directly hit by a Hamas rockets just last week. Where was the council? Apologize for years of putting your heads in the ground while Hamas ceaselessly built up its war machine in Gaza.
Well, different groups on either side of the Israel-Hamas conflict have been speaking on the aftermath, and the latest is a Palestinian NGO, the Defense for Children International, which claims that one child is killed every 15 minutes on the Israeli bombings of the Gaza, highlighting the toll the current war has exacted on children. More than 100 children are said to have been killed every day since Israeli airstrikes besieged Palestinian enclave on October 7 in the wake of the deadly Hamas attack. For British Palestinian Dr. Ghassan Absuta, the hospital where he works at in Gaza City shakes day and night due to bombings. He was working from an operating room on Tuesday at the Al-Arabi Hospital on the night of the blast. He says the Gazan emergency room, 40% of injured are children.
40% of all the cases that I've seen have been children. A lot of them have been like this. They've lost one or two parents. And unfortunately, these kids have a long recovery road. This case today just exemplifies the kind of cases that we've been seeing. This is a young child, 5 years old. Her mother and her sister were killed. She has massive injuries involving her arms, her hands, and her back. These are very contaminated injuries that require repeated surgery, and she's unfortunately going to require repeated reconstructive surgery. At night, there was a missile strike into the hospital and a massacre ensued. We now know that 500 were killed and hundreds were wounded. I was in the operating room when the missile struck and the false ceiling of the operating room fell on us. There were hundreds of dead, there were amputated parts, there were people with primary amputations. I transferred one of the patients to Shifa with a neck injury, and this morning I found out that he's still alive in the intensive care unit.
Of course, the hardest hit in such conflicts are always women and children. As we continue with our conversations on the crisis between Israel and Hamas, back with us is the human rights activist Olatunji Laribarua, who's speaking with us from Nigeria's capital, Abuja. And before you went off, I was, asking you to make comments about some aspects of this conflict. Egypt, of course, has been strategic in this conflict, but yesterday, during a news conference with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, President Al-Sisi said that they reject a forced displacement of Palestinians. Do you think this is enough to deny people fleeing the conflict, a refugee situation in your own country?
Yeah, you have to understand the reality of the Egyptian government. 1979 peace accord with the Israeli Authority was that ceded the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, was in the furtherance of peace that was being established in the region. And the Egyptian government position is if they allow Palestinians into the Sinai, they are likely going to be attacks by Hamas and all the different militant groups of Palestinian origin, the Islamic Jihad, will start using the Sinai as a launch pad against the Israeli government. And they don't want that. It will be a breach of their accord. And to the extent to which that also, further strangulates the humanitarian condition, it's before our own very eyes, because there's been a breach of international humanitarian law in the conduct of different parties in this particular crisis. The Hamas in itself is in breach of international humanitarian law, and the Israeli government has been in consistent breach of international humanitarian law. What they have been doing, denying humanitarian access to people under siege, and also stalling access to humanitarian aid, is a breach of the Geneva Conventions, the 1949, and also the additional protocols of the 1977 or 79. So this is generally unfortunate, and the reality is that the United Nations is unable to rein in anybody. And we have to capitalize, we have to rely on regional authorities to bring peace and allow. The Egyptian government has tried its best. They have tried to midwife exchange of hostages. They have tried to, negotiate with both parties. And we'll see the extent of success that they will be able to have by the end of the day and into tomorrow. Well, my hope is that we'll be able to have the Rafah crossing open for trucks, bringing relief to the people to come into Gaza, to come into the Palestinian territory, so that there will be relief for all the people in dire straits and need around it.
Right, and so, as you say, many leaders have also been calling for a humanitarian corridor that could help refugees leave the conflict zone, not just to get aid this time in peace, but now Egypt is rejecting receiving those fleeing Gaza. Where else can they go? Know that the Rafah border crossing is the only available space.
My immediate suggestion would be to create an humanitarian corridor, even in the southern Gaza axis, leading to the Rafah crossing, and then setting up tents for people to stay in that place, because it is unlikely that Egypt will open its door. Egypt will only open its door if the Gulf countries are able to come together and present certain level of guarantees. And the real fear of the Egyptian authority, you have to also understand, if you look at their history, the authorities in Egypt are very, 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 very skeptical about the Muslim Brotherhood, about which in itself, which gave birth to the Hamas militant group in itself. If you look at the Islamic Jihad, the Egyptian government is skeptical about their true intentions. That's why they do not want them to come to the Sinai. But you can only get the Gulf authorities to come together and appeal to them. You can open up the Rafah crossing, let them, settle temporarily in the Sinai, where Israel is not allowed to strike. Israel has been striking the southern Gaza axis for the past few days. But so in one way or the other, we have to stop Israel from striking the people who are fleeing from this conflict, from striking that particular territory, so that we do not have more casualties and tragedies on our hand. If Israel is stopped from striking that region, an humanitarian corridor can be created around there without them, crossing into the Sinai. And Egypt can be allowed to open the Rafah crossing and bring in the aid. And that's the best, that will work for everybody. And also, in order to quicken the end of this crisis. And I think this is a point where we have to also demand that all hostages should be released. Israel should release Palestinian hostages. The Hamas and Palestinian authorities should release all Israelis and foreigners who are in their custody. And in that way, we will have seen a gesture of goodwill by both sides. And then we can now, try to close ranks and bring this to an end.
Right, Olatunji Lanre Barua, human rights activist, thank you so much for your time today on The World Today. And still to come on the program, the third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation is ongoing in Beijing, China, as President Xi Jinping meets with world leaders. Back in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. As we continue our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war, Iran is calling on members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to impose an oil embargo and other sanctions on Israel, and also to expel all Israeli ambassadors. This call was made by Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian at a meeting of the OIC in the Saudi city of Jeddah to discuss the escalating Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The meeting comes after a blast at the Gaza hospital late on Tuesday that killed a large number of Palestinians. Mr. Amir-Abdollahian also called for the formation of a team of Islamic lawyers to document potential war crimes committed by Israel in Gaza. A Hamas official says that the U.S. and all Western countries that support Israel hold full responsibility for the war against civilians in Gaza. Osama Hamdan said this during a press conference in Lebanon, further stating that he supports Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's position on rejecting the displacement of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. President al-Sisi said that on Wednesday that Egyptians in their millions would reject the forced displacement of Palestinians into Sinai, adding that any such move would turn the peninsula into a base for attacks against Israel. Well, President Joe Biden's show of solidarity with Tel Aviv risks undoing recent gains in the U.S.-Arab relations. And that's according to analysts in the U.S. who believe President Biden's trip could sour diplomatic ties, especially if Palestinian casualties continue to mount. After Mr. Biden's Middle East trip, which was designed to calm the region but appeared not to make much headway when a hospital in Gaza was bombed, resulting in hundreds of casualties, Jordan also called off his planned summit there with Egypt and the Palestinian Authority after the hospital blast.
There are a lot of risks. Some of the risks are right now within the war itself, and that concerns, for instance, worrying a little bit probably that as Israel continues its campaign, that it may undermine U.S. interests. Some of those interests, as we've seen over the last several years, has been the attempt to court moderate and Arab regimes and monarchies. And there is the possibility that if the war really widens not only to include Gaza, but maybe the West Bank, that it will not only alienate Arab allies, but could potentially lead to a breaking of relations with Israel, could set back whatever hopes that the U.S. had for a broader regional peace. You know, I don't think that the U.S. is going to get involved militarily, but again, I think the fact that you have the U.S. naval presence now in the Mediterranean, for some analysts suggests that the U.S. isn't quite certain that Israel's capable of dealing with a two-front war, and that the U.S. needs to stand by to protect it. And if you're going to do that, that always opens up the risk of U.S. involvement militarily in what's taking place.
It is worth saying, you know, Biden apparently managed to get the Israelis to allow the Egyptians to allow aid into Gaza during the course of his visit. So I suppose that's a good thing without reservation, but it's not a big thing. You know, I think that governments and political leaders, when they enter wars, they think that they're going to somehow produce a decisive outcome. And if we look at Middle Eastern wars of the last 50 years, that almost never happens. There's a couple of examples a long time ago where there were some decisive outcomes. 1967 is one, but I can't think of many other examples. So typically, it's a kind of a state of mutual exhaustion. Israel, Egypt, and Jordan are three of the largest recipients of American foreign aid in the world. Israel is number one, Egypt is number two, and Jordan is right up there. The militaries of these countries are completely dependent upon aid direct from U.S. taxpayers to purchase the weapons, including the weapons that the Israelis are using against Gaza right now. But they don't accept the assumptions, the guidance, or the prerogative, the priorities of Washington. So that train seems to be moving in one direction, and it's not a good direction from the perspective of the Biden White House, I would say.
Meanwhile, former U.S. President Donald Trump is reiterating his comment of the Israel-Hamas conflict never happening if he was the U.S. president. This was during his court appearance. Before entering the courtroom, Mr. Trump was asked if he was considering a trip to Israel. He neither affirmed nor denied, but said the attack on Israel would not have happened on his watch.
We will be here tomorrow. As you know, they have the big golf tournament at Doral, which I own, and I was going to go to it, but I find this very interesting. And so I may or may not be here, I'm not sure. I probably would like to go to Doral and watch the tournament. It's a tournament, it's the big final tournament of the year. And it would have been nice to have seen it. It'll be on television, we'll see what happens. But this is a disgrace, should have never, ever been allowed to happen. And I'll tell you, another thing that would have never happened is the attack on Israel. If I were president, Israel would not have been attacked. It was viciously attacked. It would not have been attacked. Ukraine would not have been attacked. You take a look at what's going on throughout the world. The world right now is a mess.
Force posture in the Middle East to avoid further escalation and training of Ukrainian troops fighting Russia are among the topics discussed by U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and UK Defense Minister Grant Shapps. During a meeting at the Pentagon, both officials focused on asset deployment to prevent further destabilization following Hamas' attack on Israel and the ensuing Middle East battle. Since the Hamas attack, the U.S. military has sought to deter other Israeli adversaries by moving assets into the region that include the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier to strike group and USS Dwight D. Eisenhower to the eastern Mediterranean. The force includes the carrier, a guided missile cruiser, and 4 guided missile destroyers.
In my direction, U.S. security assistance to Israel. We've also directed the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower carrier strike group to the eastern Mediterranean, where it will join the USS Gerald R. Ford in its own strike group. And those changes to our force posture send a clear signal to deter hostile actors from trying to shed more blood or to escalate this war. And the UK has sent a similar message by moving British military assets, including a Royal Navy task group, to the region to deter further aggression. And by the end of this year, you will have trained 30,000 Ukrainian recruits since Russia's disgraceful all-out invasion. And because of your stalwart support, Ukraine's defenders are better armed, better equipped, and better trained.
And we've seen the barbaric acts of Hamas assassinated a week ago, not militants, but pure and simple terrorists who hate freedom, hate everything that we stand for, do not want to see not only Israel, but even Jews live on the surface of the earth. They hate our way of life. And we stand together as nations who are prepared to put our money where our mouth is and send assets to the region. And of course, you're absolutely leading the way with your strike carrier group, and we've sent the Royal Navy group, as you mentioned. When it comes to Ukraine, it's kind of you to mention that we are training troops. In fact, we started training beforehand, so by the end of the year, we'll have trained 50,000 Ukrainian troops, including right back to 2014. And of course, we've sent material and assets to Ukraine, including Storm Shadows, to try to help create the environment in which the rest of the world feels comfortable to also contribute. And then your mass of equipment has been the real game changer there.
In the meantime, Washington, D.C. saw hundreds of Jewish peace activists rallying and calling on the Biden administration and Congress to press for a ceasefire. About 200 demonstrators, many from the group Jewish Voice for Peace, filled the rotunda of the Cannon House office near the U.S. Capitol, chanting, "The world is watching." They wore black T-shirts emblazoned with the messages Jews say, "Ceasefire now," and "Not in our name." However, the U.S. Capitol Police officers began arresting some protesters who refused to comply with the orders to disperse. About 500 other protesters blocked off Independence Avenue just outside. An Israeli-American mother is looking for hope after her son was kidnapped by Hamas militants on October the 7th. She is one of many relatives who are looking for their family members after Hamas' surprise assault on Israel.
Israeli-American Rachel Goldberg typically doesn't check her phone on Shabbat, the Jewish day of rest. But on October 7th, when she heard of reports of a possible incursion from Hamas militants on Israel's soil, she turned on her phone to check on her 23-year-old son, Hirsch. Goldberg received 2 messages via WhatsApp from her Hirsch, and they were the last she received from him since October 7th. "I love you guys. I'm sorry."
I turned on my phone, and it was around 8:20 that I turned on my phone. And I saw that at 8:11, 2 messages had come in a row. The first one said, "I love you." And the second one said, "I'm sorry." And so I instantly, had this lump in my throat, knowing something bad was happening or was about to happen. And I tried to call him, and he didn't answer, and I texted, and I still haven't had any response.
Hirsch had gone to the Nova Music Festival with a friend, which was one of the targets during the Hamas rampage across southern Israel, in which over 1,300 people were killed and several hundred taken hostage. After that, 54-year-old Goldberg lost contact with Hirsch. She scrambled to find news of her son. Family friends visited hospitals to identify bodies. But at last, she happened to see an image of Hirsch and his friend on social media of the two hiding in a bomb shelter. It was a glimmer of hope. Eventually, survivors of the massacre on the music festival contacted Goldberg and her husband with news they had seen Hirsch. He was visibly injured. They got onto a Hamas pickup truck with other hostages. Israeli police traced Hirsch's last phone signal to inside Gaza Strip. Since then, Goldberg, a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, has had no proof that Hirsch is alive, but she chooses to believe that he is.
There's only 2 options. So between he's dead or his arm is blown off and he's being held hostage, those are the 2 options. And they're both horrible, but I'd rather have him be alive, obviously. So that's what we're praying. But I don't know that he's alive. I don't know that he made it.
Goldberg said she and her family have been in touch with Israeli and U.S. authorities about Hirsch's situation, but little progress has been made. For now, she only wishes that she could speak to Hamas directly.
I really would love to talk to Hamas. I want to understand, what is it? What is it that is wanted from this situation? Because it's such an unusual situation. I'm not a historian, but I don't know of situations where people steal 85-year-old grandmothers and 2-year-old children and hippies who are dancing barefoot at a music festival. I'm just not familiar with that.
Since the attacks, Israel has vowed to annihilate the Hamas movement that controls Gaza. Israel has since bombarded the Gaza Strip with airstrikes that have killed more than 3,000 Palestinians, a quarter of them children, and driven around half of 2.3 million Gazans from their homes.
Let's bring you other happenings in the world. Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima has met with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing for the Third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation. President Xi welcomed Mr. Shettima to China and expressed appreciation to Nigeria for its contribution to the success of the China-Africa Leaders Dialogue held in August in South Africa. On his part, Mr. Shettima congratulated President Xi on the successful hosting of the BRF and hailed the mutual respect in the relationship between China and Nigeria while expressing Nigeria's willingness to intensify cooperation with China.
And I want to thank you for successfully hosting this Belt and Roads Forum. Why we respect China is that you treat us with respect and dignity. Unlike some people who want to treat us as kindergarten pupils who need to be taught which candy is healthy for them or not. And we are willing to partner with China for the greater glory of our two nations and our two respective continents.
Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping has also met with Kenyan President William Ruto. Mr. Xi appreciated the long-standing friendship between China and Kenya, with both countries treating each other as equals. Mr. Ruto, in turn, admitted that Kenya is a great beneficiary of the Belt and Road Initiative and expressed confidence in the 8 steps, which will further boost the global impact of the BRF.
Mr. President, on my own behalf and on behalf of my delegation, I wish to congratulate you for hosting the 3rd Belt and Road Forum. We are celebrating 10 years of your initiative around Belt and Road infrastructure construction, where Kenya is a great beneficiary. The 8 steps you put forward this morning during your keynote address will vastly enhance the impact of what has been achieved in the last 10 years of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as the two countries forge closer ties in the face of what they see as a hostile and aggressive US-led Western camp. Russia's state-run TASS news agency reported that Mr. Lavrov's meeting with President Kim had lasted over an hour, but the ministry did not provide further details. Mr. Lavrov, who arrived in Pyongyang on Wednesday, earlier thanked the North Korean authorities for backing Russia's military actions in Ukraine and pledged Moscow's complete support and solidarity for President Kim. The visit is seen as setting the stage for a visit by President Vladimir Putin, who has stepped up cooperation with politically isolated North Korea. And as we close the program, a decades-old ban on cruising in low-slung cars known as low-riders has been lifted in California, paving the way for the thickened or tricked-out vehicles and their enthusiasts to freely drive around California streets starting January 1st, 2024. The state became the first to repeal an ordinance that for years cited and outlawed modified classic cars from parading city streets. Many in the low-riding community say the ban disproportionately targeted communities of color and wrongfully associated the culture with crime. The United Lowrider Coalition says cruising is an integral part of the lowriding culture, but fear of being pulled over or ticketed has hampered the art.
Los Angeles, this is where it's at. You know, this is where lowriding started. This is where the heart is at. And for us, having it the hardest to can't even cruise our cars, it's a big step for, like, that means that if we can do it, any other state shouldn't have a problem getting it done.
I love to either three-wheel my car, hit the switches, bring it up and down, side to side, hop. I'm not a professional hopper. I'm getting there, but I'm able to do a few things here and there. And versus having it parked, I mean, we can still put it on its side, hit a switch here and there, but it's not the same. It's not that adrenaline rush.
So the culture of low riding is going to look fantastic because the state of California is the first state in the whole United States who's going to pass a law that cruising is okay to do. So already other states are looking at what we're doing here in the state of California.
To me, cruising it's a very integral part of the lowrider culture, because that's how you share, you know, when you're passing on the boulevard and the smiles and the peace and the thumbs up, and you get to see other people's rides. And to me, aside from sharing the culture, it's therapeutic. Because when I'm cruising, Christine, everything goes away.
This is what we want to leave and tell people. You know what? Your vote does count. And if you believe in something, like they always say, go for it. Follow your dreams, follow those steps, and make it happen.
What an art form indeed. Well, that's our program today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers. See you next time.